On behalf of Steve and me,
Good
where
morning,
is everybody?
Good morning, everybody. As we go to the Chitas of today, we're holding in the portion of Vayakel. We're holding on Sunday. We're holding on chapter 35, verse number 21. Everyone's heart was uplifted, brought as Kol Asher, as Kol and Dava, Asher Nodvu Ruche, which was generous of heart. Hevio as Trumas Havai, they brought the contribution of God for God. Amlecha Seomeir to the work of the tent of the meaning, the Beis Hamikdash, Mishkan, and to all its services, and for the garments of holiness. And the men accompanied the woman, Kol Nediv Leiv, all those that were generous of heart. They brought Choch, they brought the bracelets and nose ring, the finger rings, the chastity belts, Kol clays of all the golden objects. The Chol Isha Shehin Zav, and all those men who donated wave offerings of gold to God. Now she says, Al Noshim, with the woman closely following them. This is a round kind of ornament that's placed on the arm, the bracelet. This is a golden object that's placed in the woman's private parts. Now, rabbis explain chumuz as an acronym to say kan mokim zima. This is a place of immorality. Whoever had Turkish vargam, purple, v'seilah shani and scarlet wool, v'sheish v'ishesh or linen, v'yizim and goat's hair, v'oides elam adamim, or those who had red dyed skin rams, v'oides tchashim, and those who had the skins of a tchashim heviu they brought. Now she says, whoever had with him Turkish or purple or scarlet wools or ram or tchashim, all of them brought them. Verse number 24, whoever set aside a contribution of silver or copper, as trumas havaya, they brought this offering to God. Whoever had acacia wood, whoever had those materials, they brought. Verse 25, an all wise woman spun by hand, who knew how to do weaving, and they brought the spun yarn of Turkish, purple, and scarlet wool and linen. Verse number 26, and all the women whose heart inspired them with skill, they brought the goat, they spun the goat's hair. Rashi says this was especially a skilled craft, that they spun the goat's hair while it's still in the back of the goats. Verse 27, and the princes brought the onyx stones, and the incense stones. They brought the stones that were for the ephod and the choshen. Now she says, Abnosan said, what prompted the princes to be first to contribute in the offering and dedicate the altar, when the construction of the tabernacle they were not the first to contribute? It was because regarding the construction of the tabernacle, the princess said, let the community contribute whatever they can contribute, and whatever is missing will complete. However, because the community provided everything, he said, what do we have? What they brought enough. The princess says, what can we do now? So they brought the onyx stones. Since that was left for them that was the only thing that was left for them to contribute to the stones. Therefore, they were the first. When it came to the dedication of the Mishkan, they said, no, we're not going to wait for anybody. We're going to be the first to do it. Therefore, in the first contribution offered the dedication of the altar, however, because they were first acted with the element of laziness, the letter is a Nisim is missing a Yud. The pasuk takes out the Yud from the word Hanasiim to show that they were lazy. They came last. Verse 28, and it was brought also the spices and the oil of the luminary, and for the anointing oil, and for the incense offering. Verse 29, Kol ish ve'isha, every man or woman, asher nadav libam, which who the heart compelled them to bring, lahavis kalamracha shetiv Hashem, to do all the work that God commanded, lases b'ad Moshe, to be done through the hands of Moshe. Heviu b'nei Yisrael, the Jewish people brought nidav al Hashem. They brought all of these as a donation to God. And that completes the Chumash for today. We go now to the Tanya of the day. We're in the middle of chapter 35 of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe yesterday said a zoyar, a statement from the Yenuka about Chacham Eina Beroshai, that a wise man his eyes is in his head, and the Alter Rebbe says because a wise man always looked at the nail, the fire that's on top of his head, because Shechina Bereisha, Shechina, the presence of God, is on the head of a person, and therefore, if he's a smart man, he always looks above him, and he always realizes that there's a godliness above him. Therefore, the Gemara said, therefore the Zohar says, a wise man doesn't walk without a yarmulke for Amos. He doesn't walk without a yarmulke. He always wears a covering over his head. So now the Alter Rebbe goes into the mashal. He goes to explain the analogy that the Zohar says, the Yunka, young sage in the Zohar, that says that we have to look at a person like a candle. The wick is his body, and the neshama is the fire, and the wick needs to have the fire of the neshama needs to have oil. That's the mitzvahs and the Torah he learns. That was the analogy. That was the statement of the Zohar. In a beer, Marshal Zeh, the Alter Rebbe says the meaning, to explain the meaning of this analogy. Sheim shel Or HaShechina, that we compare the light of the Shechina, the light of God, to the light of a candle. It is clear to every intelligent person, as the Alter Rebbe will conclude shortly, after close examination of its details, just as it's true of the candle flame. So the Zohar compares the fire to the fire of God, to the neshama, to God and the Shechina itself. Because, and the analogy is that it doesn't shed light. Fire does not exist without, nor it's retained by the wick without oil. The fire and the wick need oil. By nature, fire strains upwards and will not remain below unless it is trained by a wick or wood, for example. But a wick alone will consume quickly, and the fire will vanish quickly. Moreover, the burning wick produces a dim and smoky light, for it consists of material insufficient refined to be completely absorbed by the oil, by the flame. So oil, on the other hand, is a completely transformed into the flame. That's one, the concept of oil. Oil is bottled to the flame. Oil gives itself over to the flame. And it's totally transformed into the flame and absorbed by the flame. Burning steadily, it produces a pure and clear light. This is what's meant by the Alter Rebbe statement that without the oil, the flame of the candle, number one, does not shed light. Number two, nor does it retain by the wick. So the fire needs to have the oil on all aspects for the light itself and for the wick, because without the oil, the wick would disappear. Turning now, the truth is, the oil needs the wick too, because without the wick, the oil is not going to fire. And no, if you put fire to oil, not to gasoline, but to oil, it's not gonna burn. Return now to the point of the analogy. Similarly, the Shechina, that Zohar wants to tell you, the Shechina, the presence of God, does not rest upon man's body. Which in this analogy is compared to the wick. it needs to have good deeds. And the Chacham realizes that. A wise man realizes that his neshama, the Shechina, that is above him, needs to have good mitzvahs, needs to have good deeds. The body can only act as a wick, not as oil. In his coarse physical being, which it will not be able to absorb within the light of the Shekhinah, but will always remain separate from it. The good deeds that man performs provides the oil. And therefore, we need to do good deeds, because we simply need to give the existence, the food for this fire. It's evident for the Zohar, however, that one soul, even the soul, he has a soul. So why isn't the soul enough oil for it? It's not enough. So because the soul is a part of God, is insufficient to serve as oil because it's part of it's itself. So it cannot be the oil for this light. You need something else. Question implied here: why should the soul, itself divine and thus certainly suited for being absorbed within the light of the Shekhinah, require any external such a good deeds to serve as oil for that light? Surely the soul itself should be considered, should constitute the oil. So the Alter Rebbe says it doesn't work. By reasoning for this, the Alter Rebbe now concludes the sentence began earlier. The words, the meaning of this analogy is clear that it's understandable to every intelligent person. So the Alter Rebbe will now proceed to explain why good deeds can serve as oil to light the Shekhinah, where the divine soul cannot. Explanation is in brief. Man's soul is not, after all, completely nullified before God, and one with him to the extent that is capable of becoming absorbed within the light, God's light. So here the Alter Rebbe goes to a deeper explanation. The neshama itself, that's a chelek elakav mamish, but ultimately it's an expression of God, and therefore, that's why even angels and neshamas really cannot express the essence of God. This is true to even the soul of a tzaddik, who serves God with the loftiest forms of love and fear. Indeed, it is the soul's very love of God that emphasizes its separateness, that it loves God. For love entails two separate entities, the lover and the beloved. Similarly with fear, the one who fears and the other one who is feared. So that you say that the neshama has a tshuka, has even a love and a desire to God, that means the soul is ultimately a separate entity. So the soul, even though the soul is a chelek elakav, is part of God, but nevertheless, it's a separate entity. The only thing that can be bottled, totally nullified to God is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is totally nullified to God. There's no existence to the mitzvah if it wasn't a command by God. Only good deeds, mitzvahs, as the Alter Rebbe will explain further on, are completely one with God, and therefore serve as the oil, which can be absorbed within the flame of the light of the Shekhinah that is kindled above man. So now you understand why even the neshama, which is a part of God, as we say, it's a chelek at a time, only a part of God, not God. God is selfless to the soul. God is also a finite to an infinite concept. So as we learn in Chassidus, that the most important thing in life is the gashmis, is the physical mitzvah, because the physical mitzvah that we do is the only thing in existence that totally surrenders itself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Oil, and that's why the mitzvah is compared to oil. Oil surrenders itself to the fire. Oil has no existence but the fire. I mean, I'm sorry, it doesn't have not that it doesn't have existence. Oil totally is mavata, gives over its existence. That's a really gives over its existence to the fire, and it's ready to be consumed. Even though when it's consumed, it's going to be totally nullified. It's totally consumed into the fire. The Alter Rebbe wrote, for the soul of man, afilu tzaddik gomer, even a perfect tzaddik, Oived Avaya is somebody who serves God, B'yira, with fear of God, Ba'ava, and love of God, B'tainugim, in the pleasures of godliness. Meaning, his love consists of delight and experience of godliness. A most lofty form of love is tainugim, is delight. But the ultimate, there's nobody in the world, even the greatest tzaddik, who's totally, utterly nullified. That he loses his existence in the existence of God. To become merged in a perfect unity. There's no human being is a perfect unity with God. He is a person that is bottled to the Eibishter. He's a person that is connected, that loves God, that fears God. Rather, separate entity is a physical entity which fears God and loves God. Since it's not absorbed within God, the oil is absorbed within the flame. The soul cannot serve as oil for the light of the Shekhinah, because the soul is ultimately, even though it has an unbelievable love of God and has an unbelievable desire, it's still the soul that desires God. It is a separate entity. The truth is that we want to make sure that it always stays a separate entity. Whether it's in this world, whether it's in Gan Eden, it stays its own entity. The soul has an identity. If it would be totally nullified within God, it would lose its identity. As the oil loses its identity when it goes into the fire, it totally is consumed. We don't want the neshama to be totally consumed. Even the neshama of a tzaddik gomer, we don't want his neshama to be totally consumed. Not so is mitzvahs, good deeds. Which every mitzvah you do is the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Each command represents God's desire that a particular act be performed. With its saying is Baruch, and the will of God, who makar achayim, the will of God is the source of life for all worlds. All worlds and all created creatures of the world. They live only because God so desires. The difference between divine will expressed in the mitzvah and the same will expressed in creation lies in the latter's descending from them by means of many contractions, tzimtzumim, and by concealment of the contents of God. So that's the difference. All is the rots in the Eibishter. All is the will of God. God wanted a rock and he wanted a mitzvah. What's the difference between a rock and a mitzvah? The rock came about through many contractions, and therefore you don't see godliness in the rock. You don't see the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the rock. We step on the rock. We don't see any will of God in the rock. Meaning the internal aspect of the supernal will, with only the external, the superficial aspect of God's will express itself in the creation through a descent from level to level. Until ultimately the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to want a rock comes into the rock. And therefore the rock feels itself as a separate entity, as a doimim, inanimate object. And it looks like it's a rock. Stone, it doesn't move. Now this rock is a rock, and it's not going to be, nobody's going to budge this rock. You're not going to transform this rock. That's why we compare a person that has his heart is dull. Is called like you have the heart of a rock. Your Leif Kevin, his heart became a rock. It's unmovable. It's unchangeable. It's like a rock. The Eibishter wanted this rock. Now I have a rock. And I've made myself the concept of a rock. That's what we call a Kshei Eiref. The Torah, we call the stuff a stiff neck. Stiff, doesn't budge. Doesn't budge. The rock doesn't budge. My neck doesn't budge. Doesn't budge. I don't budge. So that all various tests would be possible for the world and the creature to come into being, to be created ex nihilo as a separate entities without becoming nullified out of existence, as mentioned above. So without the previous numerous forms of concealment of godliness, all created beings would be completely nullified before divine will that created them. And they would have no independent identity if there was no concealment if there was no concept of tzimtzumim, where God contracted himself to be able to make something that seemingly has its own identity. Thus, the divine will expressed to creation can only come about through a seeming contraction, occultation, and descent. So therefore, ultimately, God comes into something that is seemingly has its own identity, even though the truth is it wouldn't be here without God's will. The truth is there's no difference between a neshama and a rock, because both are created by God, and both are the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Eibishter wanted a rock, God wanted a rock, and God wanted a soul. God wanted an angel. And God wanted a mitzvah. So what's the difference ultimately between the rock and everything else is the concept of where the spirituality is seen. So that's why the neshama is such a spiritual thing, that it's so spiritual that it's totally part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore we don't feel it. But here the Eibishter gave us the capability to take a rock, something that's a diamond, to take something that's a skin, for example, and create a mitzvah to it. Take this aspect, whether it's a cloth, whether it's it's oil, take these things. Actually, the Mishkan was built of all different materials, from inanimate things to vegetation to animal aspects. And he said to make a Mishkan out of all the different parts of the world, from an inanimate object till the concept of an animal. And who should do it all? A human being. The human being should create this, should build this. What happens? Then this thing that you created becomes batal, becomes totally one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and loses its physical identity almost. It becomes a mitzvah. Like you take parchment, you make it into a tefillin, or you take parchment, you make a mezuzah. It's not anymore parchment. If it's a mezuzah, it's a mitzvah. It loses its whole thing. It became a mitzvah. The tefillin became a mitzvah. Tashmishe kedusha, it's called. These are articles of holiness. You're not allowed to abuse it. You're not allowed to throw it in the garbage. You have to bury it if it becomes non-kosher. It needs to be respected. Why? It's a physical thing. It's an inanimate thing. Turned into, you became a piece of parchment. It became a piece of, no, this is Tashmisha Kedusha. These are holy articles. Aron Kodesh. This became an ark of holiness. The respect. You open the Aron Kodesh. You stand up. You're not allowed to use the Aron Kodesh for anything else. I've taken a physical thing. I've transformed it. It's like the oil that is consumed by the fire. The godness consumed it. The opposite of a mitzvah. The mitzvah is not the external. There's the difference between a mitzvah and anything else. The Eibishter, God wanted a rock for something else. God wanted a mitzvah for itself. It's not for something else. It's for itself. It's the mitzvah itself has a purpose in the mitzvah. It's not that I'm using the mitzvah to accomplish something. I'm using the mitzvah, what the mitzvah is, to bring godliness in the world. That's what the mitzvah does. Why does the mitzvah bring godliness in the world? Because that is the will of God. That's why we bring godliness in the world, because it's the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The mitzvah is the will. There's no second reason to the mitzvah. The mitzvah is the reason itself. That's why we do it, for its reason itself. And that's why over there is not chitzonis, the outer. That's the difference in chassidus between chitzonis and outer reason, pnimis and inner reason. An outer reason is an ends to a means. That I'm doing it for something else. I don't need it for itself. I need to do it for something else. And everything in the world you do is for something else. Besides a mitzvah. A mitzvah is done for the sake of itself. The mitzvah is for the command itself, for the kedusha itself, for the holiness itself. The ancient master upon a cloud. And there's no hidden concept in this mitzvah. That's why the simple bracha of the mitzvah is the meaning of the mitzvah. There's no hidden concepts in this mitzvah. This is doing the simple reason is that you believe in God. That's why every mitzvah, as we said before in Tanya, every mitzvah it should reflect our amun in the Eibishter. Every mitzvah reflect our faith in God. That is the Eibishter, God who asked us to do this mitzvah. And since I believe in God, then that's what I do. There's no hidden things in here. On the contrary, mitzvah, the underlying purpose, is the inner aspect of will, of the creation of it in its entirety. To illustrate an example, one engages in business, so we're able to realize the profits and thereby support his family. Nobody wants to go to work. We go to work because you got to make a living. Why you need to make a living? Because you need to have a house. Why you need a house for? You need a family. Why you need a family? So everything we're doing for something else. In all, he wants this business to prosper, wants to profit. He wants to provide for his family. Yet his true inner will lies only in supporting his family. His desire for profits is merely incidental. I cannot support my family. I can't pay my rent. I can't pay my mortgage if I don't do work. Who wants to work? Everybody would wish that the money would come down from heaven. No, we got to go to work. So really, the work is for something else, and we can keep and everything that we do in life, we need to eat. Why? Because we need to eat for something else. But that's how we make a bracha. Bracha is that we need to eat because we want to reveal the godliness of the food. So now the eating becomes a mitzvah. So the eating becomes a purpose within itself. Not that I need to eat for the sake of I need food. Maybe I wouldn't eat food, and we can exist without food. No, but I need to elevate the physical, and that's how I make the bracha. I reveal the godliness within the physical. Now I transform the eating into a whole different reality. It's not that I'm eating because I'm hungry and my body needs food. I'm eating because I want to make a bracha. Without the eating, I couldn't make a bracha. And I want to make a bracha. And therefore, the Eibishter gave me the capability that through my eating, I can make a bracha, and I can bench, I can make many, I eat bread. I now can make 5 brachas because I've eaten bread. Actually, 6 brachas, 2 brachas before and 4 brachas after. Imagine, because I eat a piece of bread, now I can bless the Eibishter with 6 brachas. 6 different brachas. I can thank God with 6 different brachas. How many brachas I can make during the day? When I drink, I keep on drinking. Make a bracha before and a bracha after. There's so many brachas, right? We know we have to make 100 brachas a day. That's the minimum. We should make many brachas a day. And here, God gave us the capability through these physical realities to make more brachas and to create. Then that was the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to bring godliness into the world. To make a bracha, to thank God. Because by thanking God, I bring godliness in the world. So that's not the external, that is the reason. That's the whole creation of the world. This whole physical world was created for that bracha. For that blessing. That was the reason why the whole thing was created, for this bracha. So the bracha is the pnimius. The bracha is the internal. The physical is the external. So too, with divine will as expressed in creation and as expressed within the mitzvah, the desire for creation is the external will. It is generated by the inner desire that a Jew observes the mitzvah, obviously an impossibility without creating the world. So, because the mitzvah represents God's true inner will, and because in them there's no concealment of his will, unlike the other case of creation, therefore the godly life force within them is by no means a separate entity. It is the whole purpose. It is the oil. It is the inner purpose. That's why Chassidus is compared to oil. Chassidus is compared to oil because oil, nigla, out of part to yain, because yain gives you delight, and learning Torah should give you delight. But learning Chassidus gives you the oil. It gives you the inner purpose of everything. Gives you the purpose of this fire. There's no secondary reason to this learning. The learning of Chassidus is the fire, is the oil, is the whole reasoning behind what you are and who we are. So this mitzvah, when I do this mitzvah, becomes totally it's united, it comes totally united with the contained within God's will, totally consumed by the will of God. I do the mitzvah, now this physical thing that I've done, totally consumed within the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the mitzvahs, are truly joined by every mitzvah I do becomes totally one. The Yichud Gama with a complete unity with God's will. It's thus clear why, in the above mentioned metaphor, the mitzvah can serve as oil for the light in the Shekhinah, and they are truly absorbed within the transforming into the light of the divine will. Second. Into the divine, within the eternal divine will, just as the oil is absorbed within the flame. Alter Rebbe will arrive at this conclusion after primarily discussing on what the Zohar means when it says the light of the Shekhinah rests on man. And that will continue in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow. But that ends the Tanya of the day. The day is the 17th day of the month, which the Tillim of the day is chapter 83 to chapter 87. If you do those 5 chapters, you do the Chitas of the day. The Rebbe writes in Hayom Yom for the 17th day of Adar, many years before the Alter Rebbe imprisonment in Petersburg, in the year 1798, he once came out of his private quarters to Chassidim who gathered and said, in Gan Eden, they sensed the preciousness of this lowly world. Not only the ministering angels, but even the earliest emanations would forgo everything for a one Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba that a Jew says with all his power, meaning and full concentration. All the heavenly worlds would give up everything for one Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba that a Jew can say in Shul. Meaning being totally immersed and involved in these words. This is all he said. The effect was that he kindled such a flame and such a burning enthusiasm in all who heard. And therefore, made up beautiful and beautiful and everybody.
Breaking up.